Very excited to be here. Thank you so much for replying as quickly as you did and for coming on the show. Alejandro Chavez, political director at Strategies 360. You joined on to help them with their Smart and Safe Arizona campaign. You went there to help win the legalization of recreational marijuana in Arizona, and you won. So congratulations to you. You've also done amazing work with moveon.org. So you have a very, very impressive resume, and I am very excited to speak with you. How are you today?
Good.
I know you've done a lot of amazing work with the Latina community, and I just want to ask you, what is it that made you go down this route and do this type of work?
Yeah, look, a couple of things. One, look, I grew up in the movement. My grandfather was Cesar Chavez. So, volunteerism, I didn't realize people got paid for organizing until I was about 29. And, 30 years old before I was like, oh, people get paid for doing this? I think that, as a brown man, I'm not able to walk away from politics. I'm not able to say, oh, I'm just going to leave that at work. I don't have that luxury. And so if I'm going to be entrenched in it, why not get paid for doing something you love?
Hey, and you make a big impact. And like you said, it's in your blood. So your grandfather was Cesar Chavez. I didn't want to lead into it because I imagine that whenever you say your last name, people say, oh, you're the grandson, blah, blah, blah. I actually watched some videos leading up into this. And I feel like I know about your family. You had 31 cousins. There's a lot of you.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Did you feel like you always had to go down this route because of that and your family history? Was there ever a point where you're like, you know what, maybe I'll just be an accountant?
No, I wish. More of, there was never anything that drove me to do it intentionally other than I got the bug. The difference between me and other organizers is that when I got bit by the bug, my grandfather happened to be Cesar Chavez, right? But we all get bit by the bug. There's no one thing it is. One day you wake up, you're kind of sick of shit, right? You're kind of sick of all the bullshit that's happening. You're sick of, every time you go to work, you have to be Alex or X, right? Whatever,
make your name more white.
Right. And, or if they do, you don't correct it. Right. And actually I've gotten older. And as I've gotten older, I've done more of, when people say, oh, Alejandro, is there a shorter version? Yeah, Alejandro. So
that's it.
I think that there was just a point of me where I stopped being Alex, all these other nicknames, and I started owning my name. And in that came ownership of me. And I think that that's what got it. And then organizing just happened to be where, I got a lot of qualities that are, maybe not the best in the real world, but they're really great for organizing and campaigning. So, it works out well for me.
Amazing. And you grew up in Arizona?
No, I actually grew up in the Bay Area.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, San Francisco. And I'll tell you, moving here was quite a culture shock for me. Even to this day, it's weird for me to walk around and see people with guns.
I've never been to Arizona, so I don't know too much what it's like.
It's like, there's open carry states, and then there's pro-gun states where they're like, everybody should have to carry a gun. And Arizona is one of those states where it's like pro-gun, ammo and bullets.
Very different than California where you grew up.
Very different. Even to this day, when you walk when you used to go into bars and places, they'll have signs that say no guns allowed. And I just was used to that. Yeah, I'm just used to that always being like, no, we know, no guns allowed, right?
Yeah, well, don't bring your gun here. Yeah. And so your family is from Arizona, correct?
Yeah, my grandfather was born here, but my father and most of my family grew up in California, the 50s and 60s, 70s, yeah.
Awesome. And so what is it, the demographics of Arizona like? I see that I'm pretty sure they've called it for Joe Biden at this point. It looks like we're going to be saying Senator Mark Kelly. So 2018, Kristen Sinema as well. So it's now seeming like a blue state. What has changed about the demographics of Arizona?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily just demographics. And I will say, look, what happened was in SB 1070, in 2010, really paved the way, like Prop 187 in California back in the 90s, right? it really paved the way for a lot of Latinos to get engaged. So I think a combination of young Latinos, and two, resources being put into here. I think you've had plenty of people who were eligible to vote, but were never reached out to. The resources were never put in to get them to vote. And so I think you're seeing a lot more of that, not just from candidates, from a lot of groups, national groups, and recently our initiative. So I think there's just a lot more happening to get Latino people involved, more ways onto the political highway, if you will. There's more on-ramps.
Awesome. And so tell me about Prop 207, legalization of adult use of marijuana. I don't know if you have the number breakdowns, like how did Latinos affect this initiative? And tell me about the work that you did to get this passed.
Yeah, so I don't have exact numbers yet. I know that some of our polling was showing that from when we started our Latino outreach program, or not even, it wasn't specifically there, but we decided, hey, we're going to focus on this group, right? We saw about a 15% increase in support. And that's for Latinos from 18, first we did 18 to 45. Then we went 55 and older. And yeah, we saw a decrease in support, but actually not dramatically as we thought. Part of what we did was, we did live calls. We used Chuck Rocha, who we were talking about, Solidarity Strategies, and we invested the money into having conversations with people, but not just to be like, oh, check out. We had an idea of what mattered with people. We knew that Latinos care about community college, or I was aware, right? Like you all know how many Latinos we have. I mean, there's Latinos with degrees that go to community college, right? To take a class just for whatever, right? Like it's part of our culture. So I knew Latinos cared about community college. We also knew Latinos care about social justice. We know care about economic development, right? Opportunity. And then we also knew that it would take validators to bring us across. So we were able to secure the endorsement of Dolores Huerta, we were able to secure the endorsement of former state senator and community college president, Alfredo Gutierrez. So when we were talking to people in Maricopa County, Dolores' name, and talking about Alfredo's support really went well when we talked about community college and social justice. Then in Tucson, we got the support of Mayor Regina Romero, Latina. And so down there, we talked about economic development, what it meant for cities. And then we got the support of Dolores and Regina, reinforcing the things they have, but also saying like, hey, you don't just have to trust us. You can trust people that have always led you or have always been supporters of what's right.
And so you said that there was a little bit of decrease in support as you got older, not too significant. How do you close that gap? Because I know it, I am Latino as well. And when I speak to older relatives, it's definitely a little bit tougher to get them to understand the benefits of legalization. They have that traditional kind of reefer madness that marijuana is bad. It's a gateway drug mentality. How do you close that age gap?
Well, a couple of things. One is you're never going to win anyone over in one conversation. Like I think everybody thinks there's a magic bullet. And let me give you a quick story about my grandfather. So my grandfather was, had been doing organizing, and some student had really wanted to pinpoint what he was doing. And they said, Cesar, I want to follow you, learn, tell me what you did. What was it? You got 17 million people to stop eating grapes. What did you do? And he said, well, I went and I talked to one person, and I talked to another person, and I talked to another. And his basic principle was, it happens one person at a time. So, and it's not one conversation, it's many conversations. So I think a couple of things that really help are, look, older people care about their mijos and mijas and don't want them going to jail. They don't want them being locked out of opportunities. We had expungements in ours, so which means, hey, if you'd messed up, you can get, if it was 2.5 ounces or less, you can have it reduced. You can have it expunged, right? So I think those things, and then also having real conversations and hearing their concerns. One of the ones I heard was, oh man, I know some guy who went to Vietnam and smoked that shit and got all fucked up. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I should. Sorry. and then, the truth is, what maybe fucked people up was killing people. Maybe like being over there killing people is what messed people up, right? And so I think having conversations and not trying to debunk everything in one conversation, but having a logical conversation with each individual part. And then the final piece I think that moves people over is passing it, right? Like we know what's helped is having medical. You know, I got friends who their grandmothers don't smoke, but they got an ointment and it has to be THC ointment for arthritis. It can't be CBD oil. It has to be THC. You know, and so these are the things that I think in our community happen. And you can even just tell the history of marijuana, right? How many abuelas or nanas, I called my abuela nana, had, you know, my nana Juana would have a little bit of yerba buena in the garden that when you got sick, you could go just pick a couple of leaves off and put it in with mint and tea, right? And then that was all you got sick, right? Like, and I'm sure everybody had it, right? You probably had a similar thing in your experience, or your parents did. And so I think once we start having those conversations and talking about it outside of, oh, it's just a bunch of young kids smoking with a pot leaf. No, but if you name it and call it what it is and talk about it responsibly, let's do it smart and safe. And that's one of the reasons why the name was so important. Yeah, we could have been like, oh, let's get high everybody initiative, right? Like, but nobody would have failed, right? I would not have even signed on to that because I've been like, who are these people running this? But when we talk about it being smart and safe because we already know it's happening, that's how you win people over and move them. And the divide was not as much. And actually, surprisingly enough, I think data may show that it might have been more older Latino males supported it than Latinas, which may be interesting.
Wow, I'm excited to really get into those numbers. And it did fail in 2016. What changed in those 4 years? Was it just more messaging, more information out there? Because I saw in 2016 it failed, and then the polls barely failed. And then the polls leading up to this election were mixed. It was still seen like it was going to pass, but it was a little bit mixed on how big of a margin it was going to pass by. Right.
Well, there's a few things I think happened. One is in 2016, they didn't have expungements in it. I also think that there was no emphasis put into the Latino community. Now you'll see Prop 208, which is also on the initiative on our ballot. They got 51%. And actually education, that was funding education. So it would tax anybody who made more than, I think, $450,000 and then put that money directly into education, not to the legislature, right? And it had a lot more money spent against it, but it was polling higher. And their Latino outreach was a lot of volunteer Latino outreach or ads. And I'll tell you, and 2016, they didn't even do that. Like, or they just change the ads to Spanish, right? Which does not work. Like, that's fine if you want to do it, but that's not how you organize people and move the numbers by the masses. You have to make a lot of calls, a lot of direct voter contact, whether it's text, calls, knocking, or a version of all three. Maybe you do a version of all three. And that's why we saw ours at 59, 59 and change, right? And I think, and I'm pretty sure we're on pace to have the largest voter turnout support of any initiative in Arizona history.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I do think it's because the Latino outreach we did. Look, I'm not saying against it, but there's a lot of people that are Latinos that vote and identify as Latinos, identify with the Latino culture, but don't speak Spanish like me, or younger, and they don't listen to mariachi music. They don't listen to norteño music. They don't listen to banda. They are Americanized, and not just, they've been here 3-4 generations, but even in their households, they're Americanized, right? They don't speak English. I mean, they don't speak Spanish. They probably identify things like, a good example is maybe they say tortilla instead of tortilla, right? With less accent on basic words. They speak more Spanglish a little bit. Yeah, right. And maybe not even Spanglish, right? Maybe it's none. I don't use Spanglish because I'd rather, if I don't know Spanish, I'm not going to try and fake the funk. That's just me. Like, I don't really do it that's just not my style. And that, while that's great for a lot of older Latinos, actually a lot of younger Latinos don't identify with that. You know what they identify with? Economic opportunity. They identify with accessibility to healthcare. And so it's not, and so I think that if you're just being loud and doing ads and doing those parts, that's great, but that's actually not moving the needle as much as saying, what if we took that money and as opposed to saying, let's have our volunteers do bilingual calls, you actually invested it the way people invest in suburban soccer moms, the way people invest in the white working class. Like, what if we gave that budget that we would do there? And it's not a huge budget, but what if we allocated it and reinforced it? And it worked really well. I mean, Solidarity Strategies, Daisy and Chuck are phenomenal. They have a lot of great resources to offer. And once we saw the impact of it, then, you know, we were able to invest more money and more resources to it. And I think that's why we saw us, you know, that's why we didn't lose support. That's why our polling was, you know, 58, 60%. That's where we finished. And where other groups who didn't, they didn't have that, you know, it was like I said, they made ads in Spanish. They had volunteers make some calls to bilingual people, they think, as opposed to getting in there, identifying certain communities, not just names, certain zip codes, certain precincts that actually have Spanish speaking, and not targeting the low efficacy voters, but the highest efficacy voters, and doing it before anybody else.
And speaking directly to their needs is huge in that. And what was in Prop 207? Tell me, like, how will the tax revenue be used? Is there any points in there about helping communities that have been hurt most by the war on drugs? What is exactly in the bill?
Yeah, so it has three major pieces of funding and social equity pieces. So let me walk you through the funding. First piece is community college. It's going to get about 35% and change of money. It's about 100 million. Okay. Next is public safety. After that is a social equity program. Social equity get about 25%. Public safety, excuse me, gets 31%. And public safety, you know, a lot of what people wanted to say is, oh, it's money to go into the police. That's not what it is. What it is it's money going to cities, to municipalities, to use for public safety. Public safety is fire. Public safety is law enforcement. But the cities get to use it at discretion. If they want to invest more money or try social workers as a response, there would be some money for them to try and say, hey, maybe when we have someone reporting as an addiction, we should send out a social worker. There would be a chunk of money for them to say, this is identified as social justice or social community public safety. So we want to use this money to try that. And then the social equity program, look, it's 25% of the funding to keep Black and brown people in the industry from dispensary ownership to, you know, testing. We're going to need labs to test. And so if you're an engineer or a chemist and you don't smoke weed, you don't want to work at a bud tender, you know, you're not going to sell weed. Well, guess what? We need it tested. You can work at a lab using all of your education and everything and just testing product, which is a good paying job. And the expungements. The final piece is expungements. If you have 2.5 ounces or less, you'll be able to have it removed from your record. And we're going to make funding available for that. It's estimated about 200,000 people will be impacted. But I like to think of that as families. You know, when you think about some of the people who are, especially Latinos, who, you know, you got busted 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, any of that time you got busted smoking weed with a bag, it goes on your record. What happens? You go, you get a job at a union, and you know what? You're working, you're making okay money. You're making $15, $16, $20 an hour. But you're never going to be able to get to the heavy machinery job because you have a felony, so you don't qualify for certain licenses. That's where people make $30, $40 an hour. And so when you think about these individuals, it's not just the person, oh, cool, you know, Alejandro and them are going to be able to just to, you know, go get jobs. No, it's actually people's families are going to be impacted and have that opportunity to be out of, in some cases, poverty, but even locked out of economic opportunity.
Yeah, that's huge. And to me, it's like, it's slowly going. You see, election day was a green wave. We didn't have to wait for the results like we do for the presidential. Like you saw it, 5 states in some way or another legalized marijuana, whether it was medical or recreational. It's really just going, and it's only, I feel like, a matter of time till it gets federally legalized. I know Joe Biden is publicly against federal legalization. He's more into decriminalization, thinks that there needs to be more research. What is, like, how do we get the federal government on board with this now, where I know with states, if they individually legalize it, there's still banking laws that kind of affect them. It's harder to get into it, to get all the licenses and stuff. So how do we bridge that divide?
Well, a couple of things. One is, and I think this is the best example. If you'll remember, back in 2008, when Obama came into presidency, he was a civil union guy. He wasn't for marriage equality. But yet under his presidency, marriage equality passed. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're in a similar place with Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. He has a strong vice president to be pushing him the way that Obama did. It's happening on a level of voters that are not just 18, 19 anymore. This is 18 to 45-year-olds are supporting it huge. 55 and older starting to support is the fastest growing supporters of marijuana industry or marijuana legalization. So I think it's only so long. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to have a president that is able to identify things have changed mm-hmm. and that you need to make the adjustments. And it's not necessarily about what you wanted, but about what the people wanted. Like I said, Obama was a civil union guy, and look, marriage equality passed underneath him, and he was an advocate for it. He pushed for it. He wanted it to happen. He did what he could when it was before him because he saw the people and he was being pushed from the right people.
Okay, yeah, I definitely think that is what's going to be necessary. And mm-hmm. like you said, with Vice President Kamala Harris, she is more in favor of legalization. So I hope that she does continue to push him. I want to ask, so the governor of Arizona is a Republican, Doug Ducey. He is very much an opponent against this. He was releasing voter arguments leading up to this. Was it more difficult to go against something that the governor there, I saw his approval rating dropped during the pandemic because of his handling of it. Yeah. Did that make it easier to pass it now that his approval wasn't so high? Or what was it like going against the governor and his opposition there?
Well, look, I think the thing I would say about the governor is he may be the governor, but he is a businessman. Mm-hmm. And I think that he ultimately saw that this is good business. And so while he had to play a front for his constituency of people who want to reelect him, whatever he wants to do next, that there was not him calling and raising money against it. He wasn't getting on groups aggressively. I mean, he's a governor. There's a lot more he could have done like he did previously. And I think that that's a piece of it too, that while he is a governor, he's a businessman and that he sees the economic opportunity and you can't deny it. Look, during the pandemic, there was only outside of certain retail, there was only one industry that was growing at a mass amount. The marijuana industry. They saw I heard something like they had a 300% increase in April and May of profits.
Huh. I wonder how the alcohol business did, because liquor stores stayed open, and if you looked in people's recycling bins, it was bottles on bottles on bottles.
It was. And the difference, I would say, is that marijuana industry opens up a lot more than the alcohol industry. Part of the reason why, and this may be a podcast for a different day, is just the bootleg, right, and prohibition, the way it ended, and weird. All the clubs and all the white areas were allowed to function, but they were still busting the jazz clubs, and you know what I mean. So there was a lot of racial issue with it in the first place. Mm-hmm. So I see. But the difference is that the jobs that it creates in Arizona are good paying jobs. Mm-hmm. And that the industry expands so much more than alcohol. Part of the reason why is you don't actually need lots of people to brew beer. Mm-hmm. You do need lots of people to harvest, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're not going to have big machineries going through there. You need bud tenders to sell it. You don't need each person going in and one alcohol. You don't have one liquor store for the whole alcohol, right? Mm-hmm. This, you have a bud tender for each station. So you have several at a time. And I think that that's the major difference, is the economic opportunity it brings to everybody, not just to the barley and hops people, the beer people, and the local store and restaurant people. And then just the delivering, the bagging, the testing. There's a bigger industry that really does come from it.
Yeah, and to anyone that who's listening and hasn't been to a legal dispensary, they're great. The bud tenders in there know what they're talking about. They can tell you, look, oh, you want this for sleep, you're having trouble sleeping. Oh, you want this for more head high, more body high. They can tell you everything. It is way better than going and buying from someone on the street corner or some your local weed dealer, anything like that. It's way more informative. They know what they're talking about. It's way safer. I feel like it will help people that are older, because they won't have that stigma or that shame of, oh, you know, I got to pick up from somebody who might be like in high school or younger than me. No, you walk into a store and everything is normal. I did see some of the attack ads against them, and they were always targeting, they were saying that increased use in teenagers was going to happen. There was going to be more driving under the influence. Employers were not going to have the discretion to have drug-free workplaces anymore. Were you ever worried that it was going to fail this time because of how targeted the attack ads were at like the heartstrings of like families, and like, you don't want your kids on this?
I mean, the problem with it was bullshit, right? Like, I mean, it's bullshit. Like, the fact is that teen use goes down in legalization states. Mm-hmm. And actually, so there's a lot of Republicans that supported this too. And one of the reasons that a Republican said that he supported it is he said, I can go to a high school right now and get a bag of weed. Go in there and say, who's got a bag of weed? And somebody will go find me one or have one on them. I cannot go to a campus and be like, all right, who has booze? They will ask me for alcohol. Mm-hmm. And so by making it hard, making it legal, making it smart, making it safe, that you're actually reducing the use of it and the appeal in many ways to the youth, right? Mm-hmm. If there's no money to be made off of it, why are people going to be selling it? Like you said, why is a guy on the street going to be risking getting busted when he's going to end up making $2 or $3 now? He's got to go into a different industry, right? Like, it's just a reality. Before it was profitable, now it's not profitable.
And so, yeah, it doesn't really make sense to me why keep it, like, if it's clearly not working and it's clearly accessible to teenagers. Like, New York, it is not legal, and I know that the kids here are still getting it and still getting vapes and all that. So do you think that this was something that had to be done through direct ballot initiative? Do you think that the Arizona state legislature could have ever done this on their own?
Look, I think it was more responsible for the voters to do it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think there should be more direct ballot initiatives.
Right. Now, granted, it's harder in many regards. And ideally, we would elect these people.
Why do you think it's harder?
Well, I think harder, one is, for example, I was the second to last thing on the ballot. Mm-hmm. So you're always lower on the ballot, right? One figure is always easier. So when you go door knocking, 90% of the people that a candidate talks to are going to support it. You don't have that anymore. You don't have a candidate that's like, I am the initiative. Mm-hmm. And because it's statewide, you always just need more money. A candidate can run in a district, but statewide is a little harder. And then I think raising money is always a little bit harder. Like I said, a candidate can be charismatic, can put in the call time. Usually there's several people and it's kind of harder. So I do think the initial harder. And even then we needed 237,000 signatures to get on the ballot.
I saw 420,000 were submitted.
Yeah, exactly, right?
but not all of them were considered valid.
Yeah, that's what they said, but whatever. It's all we need. That's why you always submit more, right? You always submit more. You always submit more. Mm-hmm. And we also got it. Look, signatures. I think people sometimes have to remember it's not about support. Mm-hmm. It's about whether you believe it should be on the ballot for people to vote on, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big thing. And that's sometimes how I got a lot of signatures. People like, I don't smoke weed. No, I'm not saying you do. All I'm saying is, do you think people should be able to vote on whether you should or not? Mm-hmm. That's all I'm saying. Oh yeah, absolutely. And so, 420,000 is great. And a lot of times it does show support, but I also think it shows how many people were open to it. And that's where we were able to make our case. Are you open to it? Great. And now we're able to make our case. I think we did a really good job of making a case with the Latino community, which I'll be honest, a lot of people in the state weren't doing at the magnitude we did. There's a lot of groups doing door knocking and volunteerism calls, but I can tell you that there's a difference between having a volunteer make, 100 calls and having a paid, trained, bilingual person make 5,000 calls. Of course. It is. It's just that, and they're able to have a more conversation, then okay, great, thank you. And so I think that that's where the biggest difference can be a lot of times.
You think the argument of freedom kind of ever helps? Like, people should just have the freedom to put what they want into their body. Like, is that an argument that works?
Yeah, sure. I mean, libertarian,
Maybe.
Right? Like, yeah, look, and I'm not saying that there weren't people that were not supportive, like that I was shocked were supportive. I went to this one house. Okay. So I was dropping off signs to yard signs to people. I go to one house. It's got Biden. It's got Mark Calley. Mm-hmm. It's got Michael Moscato, who was running for Congress. And then everybody, 208 yes. The very next house I go to, it's got Trump. It's got McSally. It's got Debbie Lesko. It's got no on 208. So don't get me wrong. It had a lot of supporters who were from the other side, right? Who were not traditional. But I think that's where some of them fall in. It's not that they're smokers, but that they also believe like, well, we should have our liberties, libertarians, liberties to do as we choose and put in your body. And I think that, yeah, that helps.
Yeah, there's a little bit of overlap there. And was there any state that you kind of emulated what they did, like states that have legalized already, like California or any other places that maybe the proposition was kind of created in semblance of?
All of them. What we did is we really identified, and within our own, so we did is that we identified what went right in a lot of states, what went wrong. We talked to the ACLU of Arizona to get a better idea of, what were some of the things in other states that worked but won't work here? What are some of the things that didn't work in other states that we have to do here to make sure to be forward thinking? And then we met with a bunch of groups on the ground, and we got as many groups to buy in and give in support. And so while there was a group that didn't support it, at one point they had a say. They even had a say when we were drafting it. So I know they came out, they were against it, but when we were drafting it, they actually helped draft it and played a role in even saying that community college should get more funding. Great. So we did. Now, Grant, they decided to not keep their word and decided to oppose us, but whatever. Like it all, when you get 60%, you just write it off and move on to the next thing.
Hey, so what advice do you give to other states that may have not legalized yet in terms of organizing and getting people on board?
A few things. One, I think you should tailor it to your state. Look at other states, talk to a lot of community groups, business groups, unions. You don't have to get them to all agree or even be supportive, but you should at least get what they would want in it so you can include it so they can't hate the whole thing, right? They may not like the whole thing, but they can't hate the whole thing. And I'd also say identify your support and try and make take your biggest bang for your buck. And what I mean by that is, last time there was actually, I think it did poorly with Latinos. So if we could get Latino support, if it did like I don't remember what it was, but let's say it was, only 5% supported by Latinos. And this time we got 65%. That's a 60% growth in the largest population aside from white people in the state. That's huge. That's how we got to 60%. Without that, we're 58%, we're 52%, 51%, 53%, 208, Prop 208 was 51%. So I think that we were able to open up a gap and have it over on that night because we were able to say, look, we have a lot of Latinos. We need to speak to them in Spanish, in English, about these issues, about people who understand. And I get like an example in Mississippi, it's probably the Black community. But like in North Carolina or Georgia, they have Latino populations where you'd want to do that too. And then the other thing is be smart in how you talk about it. When we had a guy that was putting up signs and he told me that they were like, why don't you guys have a big marijuana leaf right on it? Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that'll turn on. Exactly. It's like the people that already were going to support it would like it, but you're not flipping anybody's minds on that.
Yeah. And so, a lot of the times, we talked more about the economic development piece. We talked more about the jobs. We talked about the social equity. I think everything should have expungements, or if you can do clemency, but every state's different, right? So that's where I think, for example, pardoning everyone in jail is totally possible in Illinois, right? Illinois, Chicago, they did it. They totally did it. I can pretty much guarantee you in Alabama, that would be a way for it to fail. But expungements would probably do it very well in Alabama, right? More conservatives. So I think just being smart in your messaging and realizing that you have to bring people in that don't smoke and that you have to hear people's fears, because even though we all know that's reefer madness, it doesn't change that people feel that way.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And it's better to not just be like, oh, well, you shouldn't think like that, because no, there's a reason that they feel like that. And I do think that that's very important, getting people that don't smoke to say, look, we're still in support of it for these reasons. That is very, very important. So you've clearly done a lot of great work organizing Latinos and Latinas. Joe Biden seems to have won the Latino vote in most areas, but his numbers weren't as high as Hillary were, and they definitely weren't as high as Obama were. I do know in Arizona his numbers were well because he heavily invested there. Texas and Cuba, his numbers weren't as high as Hillary. What advice do you think he could have done better? Obviously, he put a lot of money into Arizona, and from what I've read, he didn't put as much money into Florida, didn't start Spanish-speaking ads early enough. What advice do you give? Because I don't want Latinos and Latinas to go more Republican in future elections. And I worry about, I used to scoff it off like Latinos for Trump. That's not big, but I do worry, and I want them to stay in the Democratic Party. So what advice do you have when it comes to organizing?
Yeah, a few things. So one, I think that, even then, if you look outside Miami-Dade, actually Joe Biden did better than Hillary with Latinos in Florida.
Did he in all of Florida? Because I saw.
Florida. So yeah, if you look outside of Miami-Dade, and you could actually, Chuck was talking about this, and then I heard Biden outperformed Hillary in Orlando, which is the area. So, so that's one example. But yes, he did not. Part of what happened in Florida is once you take out the Cubans, the Venezuelans, the South Americans, he did really, really well. Basically,
what's left after that? Just like the
Mexicans, Puerto Ricans. He saw a little bit better increase, but Puerto Ricans, Dominicans. It was just they yelled socialism, and those people come from backgrounds where that's a flag word. Like it's people don't realize to those groups, to those people, socialism and revolution have very different meanings to everybody else for whatever reasons, right?
So how do you combat that? Because I feel like Republicans are going to yell socialism at whatever candidate it would have been. Even if it wasn't Biden, they would have copied and pasted it, done the same thing. How do you combat that so it's not as effective?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things need to happen. One, you need to speak to Latino men directly. Right now, there's a lot of resources go into women, Latinas, African Americans, soccer moms. Like there's a lot of money that says if we can win women votes across the board, we're going to win. And I don't disagree with that. I really don't. I think that's very accurate. I also think that when we see Black and Latino men not showing up, we also have to look at how much money is spent towards them. So like I said, women, a lot of money is spent toward Latino voters, right? Or women voters. And then there's a lot of money spent towards white working class, which is just a nice way of saying white men. Where do we talk about the money that's spent on Black and brown men? Really, the truth is people believe that if you get Black women and brown women on board, they'll bring Black and brown men on board. That's just not true. And so I think that you need to spend the deliberate resources investing in Black and brown men outreach. And that looks like different things, in some places it may be basketball tournaments, right? In Chicago, Philadelphia, in Miami, it may be cafecitos, right? In Texas, it may be football games or whatever else. I don't know what's a big thing in Texas, but just football. And so I think that investing in there in the communities, making sure that we're having programs, that those carne asadas are great and so forth, and that's awesome. But you know what's great? A carne asada that is helping people learn how to use modern tools, or modern ergonomic accessories, so that way these guys who are hammering, 14 hours a day, learn, oh, wow, there's actually a hammer I can get that's better for my elbow. Like maybe it's secure, so I can use my whole shoulder more than just my elbow or something. I don't know.
Mhm.
And teaching some of these people how to modernize their businesses, so that way you have these guys who work at their own cars, right? They do their own car maintenance. That those guys are actually able to get licenses and get permits, so that way when your buddy comes to you but he has insurance, you can actually fix it, and the insurance company will give you the money instead of taking it to a stupid dealership. And I think those types of things are more of where it's going to be, helping people modernize their thinking in the business world, and realizing it's a minor investment up front and maybe in some cases helping, but that the long-term payoff is great. Whether it be whether you get solar powered things instead of generators, you get really solar powered. So when you're running tools during the day on a sunny day, you don't have to buy gasoline and have that running. It's just an example. So I think that's where we need to be trying to do it, and specifically targeting, what we know are traditional like mechanics, people who probably do more off the book works, and trying to get them more into the economic highway, so that way they can see the value of why they need to vote and participate.
And they need to bring on more people like you and Chuck Rocha. Like it blew my mind that they didn't talk to him, especially after all the work that he did and how successful they were in Nevada for Bernie Sanders' campaign. Alejandro Chavez, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was amazing. You really informed me about a lot. It's great to speak with you and see the passion that you have for this. You're very well educated, and I can see why Prop 207 was a success, because you clearly just get down and you do the legwork, and then you talk to people, and it's amazing to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And hey, you're a young Latino doing a great show, running a podcast. I appreciate you reaching out and getting our message out there. Because the truth is, look, I'm 43. A lot of people, whatever, I do my way. But I think the more that people your age, people that are communicating in your modern world, whether it's podcasts like this or YouTube, I'm sure you probably got some of that stuff going on too. Right?
Always, you gotta.
That you all are helping to get this thing out there, so that way people know that we're trying. There's a lot of people that would be like, I don't know what this guy's doing, whatever, I don't care. But I'm like, what are you talking about? You're young, you're talking to young Latinos. They're exactly the ones that heed the message from another young Latino that is getting the message out there. And so maybe it's one listener, maybe it's two listeners, maybe it's 100 listeners, but it's got to be done one by one. And that's what's great about what you're doing. So I appreciate you.
Hey, and it's all important. Before we go, what's next? What's next for you?
Just moving on forward to see what happens. There's always more campaigns. There's marijuana industry maybe to get in. We'll see.
Wow.
So definitely excited.
Well, you are welcome back on the show whenever, and I look forward to all the work that you're going to do in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.